My name's Robert Hayes. I'm 56 years old, though most days I feel a lot older than that. Not because of my body, it's still hanging in there, but because of what life's shown me. You see, experience doesn't just come from age. It comes from the scars that time leaves behind, the quiet lessons nobody claps for, the moments when you're forced to swallow your pride just to make it through another day. For most of my life, I believed that respect was something you earned through hard work, loyalty, and humility. My father used to say, "A man's worth isn't measured by the money he makes, but by the integrity he keeps." I held on to that. It became the backbone of my entire life, my compass at work, my shield against office politics, and the reason I kept showing up even when things got tough. But all that belief, all that old-fashioned loyalty, shattered one rainy Tuesday morning inside a glass-walled conference room at Cole & Partners Consulting, a place I once called my second home. The storm outside that morning should have warned me. The sky was heavy, gray, and moody, the kind that made the city lights blur in puddles. I remember standing at the elevator, holding a file I'd stayed up late finishing, thinking I'd done a good job. I actually felt proud walking in. I even stopped at the break room to grab my usual black coffee, no sugar, no cream, because I liked the bitterness. It reminded me that even in comfort, life keeps a little edge. When I walked into the conference room, the whole staff was there. Young faces, loud chatter, phones lighting up with notifications. I took my usual seat near the end of the table, the one nobody fought for. The veteran's spot, they jokingly called it. I didn't mind. I wasn't there to compete for attention. Then Ethan walked in. My boss, a man I'd known since he was barely out of college. Sharp suit, fresh haircut, confidence dripping from every word he spoke. I used to think of him like a son. I'd guided him, taught him the ropes when he joined as an intern. I'd seen him grow, struggle, and rise. I'd stood by him when others doubted him. But over the years, something changed. Success does that to some people. It turns humility into arrogance, gratitude into entitlement. And Ethan, he'd become a poster boy for arrogance. He started the meeting like he always did, talking about progress, about innovation, about staying relevant in a fast-changing world. His words were smooth, his tone confident. Then suddenly he shifted, he looked straight at me. His voice softened, but there was that undertone of mockery I'd learned to recognize. "You know, Robert's been with us since the beginning," he said, pacing slowly. "Back when emails were new and the fax machine was still king." The room chuckled politely. I smiled faintly, pretending to take it as a compliment. But he wasn't done. "He's like our company's time capsule," he continued, "full of memories and old habits, more laughter, louder this time, something twisted in my gut. I forced a breath and tried to brush it off. But then he delivered the line that would carve itself into my memory forever. "Maybe we should set up a vintage corner for him," he said with that smug grin. "Get him a typewriter and one of those rotary phones. You know, for the authentic experience." The room erupted in laughter. Even the people who once looked up to me, people I'd helped get promotions, the ones who came to me for advice, laughed. I could feel the heat rising up my neck, that awful mixture of shame and anger. My hands clenched around the pen in front of me so tight that my knuckles turned white. My throat felt dry, my heart hammering so loud it drowned out the noise. I wanted to say something, to stand up and remind them who I was, that I'd been there when the company was nothing but a handful of people in a dream. That I'd sacrificed weekends, family dinners, even my health for this place. But my voice wouldn't come out. Instead, I just sat there, staring down at the notepad in front of me, pretending to jot something down. Pretending it didn't hurt. Ethan smirked, took a sip of his espresso, and moved on with the meeting as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't hear another word he said. All I could think about was the laughter. That sound, it echoes, you know? It doesn't just fade. It burrows into your chest and stays there. When the meeting ended, I didn't look at anyone. I gathered my notes, kept my head down, and walked straight out of the room. Nobody stopped me. Nobody cared. As I stepped outside the building, the rain had started pouring harder. I didn't even bother opening my umbrella. I just stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling the cold drops hit my face, mixing with the tears I didn't want to admit were there. For 25 years, I'd given that place everything I had. I thought I was part of something bigger, a team, a family. But that morning I realized I was just a tool they'd outgrown, and Ethan, he wasn't the boy I once believed in. He'd become something else entirely. A man drunk on his own success. That's when it hit me. That humiliation wasn't random. It wasn't some careless joke. It was deliberate, planned, a message he wanted to remind everyone who was in charge. He wanted to make an example out of me, the old man who still believed in principles. And he succeeded. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the same man he humiliated that morning would one day become the owner of the very ground he walked on. Life's funny like that. It has a way of turning tables without warning. Standing there in the rain, drenched and broken, something inside me shifted. The Robert Hayes who walked into that meeting was gone. The quiet, loyal man who believed that decency was enough. He died that day. But something new was born in his place. Something stronger, colder, sharper. A fire I didn't even know I had began to burn in me. A voice inside whispered, "You'll rise again, and when you do, he'll remember the day he tried to break you." That was the day everything changed. Not just for me, but for Ethan too. He just didn't know it yet. For nearly 25 years, my life revolved around that building on the corner of Jefferson and Pine, the headquarters of Cole & Partners Consulting. I still remember the day I first walked through those glass doors. Back then, the sign out front was crooked. The carpet smelled faintly of coffee and dust, and the desks were all mismatched. Second-hand things someone had picked up from a liquidation sale. We were just 6 people then. 6 dreamers who believed we could turn ideas into something solid. I was one of the first hires brought on by the founder, Mr. Frank Cole, Ethan's father. Frank was old school. He believed a handshake meant something, that loyalty mattered more than a resume. He took a chance on me when I was just a middle-aged father trying to keep food on the table. I wasn't some hotshot graduate. I was a man who knew how to work. Those early days were hard. We didn't have fancy software or corporate backing. We had late nights, cold pizza, and sheer determination. I can still picture us sitting on the floor going over client files, laughing about how one day we'd have an espresso machine and real chairs that didn't squeak when you leaned back. And you know what? We made it happen. Slowly, one client at a time, one long night after another. When Ethan joined, he was just a kid fresh out of business school. Sharp, ambitious, restless. He had that spark, too much of it sometimes, but I saw potential. Frank asked me to take him under my wing, show him how the business world really worked. The messy parts, the people part. I was proud to do it. I taught him how to deal with clients, how to negotiate without burning bridges, how to lead by listening first. He used to call me Mr. H, even though I told him to just say Robert. "No, sir," he'd laugh. "You earned that respect." Back then I believed him. Years went by and Frank eventually stepped down. He said Ethan had the drive, the vision to take the company further. I didn't disagree. I stood beside Ethan on the day he officially became CEO. I remember clapping until my hands hurt, thinking how proud Frank would have been to see his son take the reins. I told Ethan that too. He smiled, hugged me, said he couldn't have done it without me. I should have known that was the last time he'd ever say something like that and mean it. Because success has a way of changing a man. At first, Ethan handled it well. He was humble, grateful, still the same kid who used to run ideas by me late at night. But slowly, bit by bit, I started to notice the cracks, the expensive watch, the new car every 6 months, the way he started using words like legacy and brand more than team and family. It wasn't overnight, it was gradual, the way rust spreads across metal, quiet and unnoticeable until it's too late. Soon he stopped asking for my opinion. Meetings that I used to lead were now run by fresh hires with perfect hair and empty eyes. I'd try to offer feedback and he'd cut me off mid-sentence. "Robert, I think we've got it covered," he'd say with that polite smile that felt like a slap. Other times, he'd roll his eyes when I mentioned how we used to do things. He called my methods old-fashioned, outdated, even sentimental. It hurt, but I kept my head down. I told myself it was just a phase that he'd come around once he realized experience doesn't age out. But he didn't. Instead, he started making jokes, little ones at first. At office lunches, he'd tease me about my dad's shoes or how I still used a paper planner instead of some fancy digital app. Everyone laughed, and I'd laugh too, just to keep things light. I thought maybe if I showed I could take a joke, he'd stop. He didn't. He got bolder. I became the joke. It's a strange thing, to watch the place you helped build turn against you. The walls start to feel smaller, the air heavier. I used to walk in each morning feeling proud. By year 25, it felt like walking into a cage I'd built. With my own hands, the company wasn't a home anymore. It was a reminder of how easily you can be replaced in the very world you created. And then came that morning, the one that changed everything. It was our quarterly staff meeting, a big one. Every department head was there, plus a few new hires I hadn't even met yet. The conference hall looked like something out of a magazine. Glass walls, chrome chairs, polished floors. The smell of expensive coffee filled the air. Everyone was buzzing with that fake kind of enthusiasm people wear when the boss is around. Ethan walked in right on cue. Tailored navy suit, polished shoes, gold cufflinks. He held a small espresso cup in his hand like it was part of his brand. I swear, even the way he walked screamed power. He flashed that movie star smile, said a few jokes about traffic, and everyone laughed even though it wasn't funny. I took my usual seat near the back. I didn't mind being there. I liked observing, listening. But that day I could tell something was different. He wasn't just running a meeting. He was performing. He started talking about innovation, how the company needed to stay ahead, how the old ways were slowing them down. His voice was sharp, confident, too loud. I could feel the tension in the room rising, like everyone was waiting for the punchline they already sensed was coming. Then he said it. Take Robert, for example, he said, turning slightly toward me. He's been doing the same thing for 20 years. Great guy, loyal as a golden retriever, but times have changed. We can't run a modern business like it's still the 90s. Laughter rippled through the room. Some people looked at me and quickly looked away. Others smirked, my chest tightened. I could feel every eye on me, and for a second I wanted the floor to just open up and swallow me whole. I tried to smile, to play along, but it felt forced. He wasn't done. Maybe we should set up a vintage corner for him, Ethan added, sipping his espresso. Get him a typewriter and a coffee mug that says world's oldest employee. The room broke into louder laughter this time, real laughter, the kind that feeds off cruelty. And that's when I felt it, the snap inside. Quiet, invisible but powerful. I didn't say a word. I just stood up. The laughter died slowly, one chuckle at a time. Ethan looked at me, maybe expecting a witty comeback or some sarcastic remark. But all I said was, "Excuse me." I walked out of that glass room, down the hallway, past the front desk, and straight out the door. Nobody followed. Nobody even called after me. Outside, the sky had turned dark. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, the kind that soaks you within seconds. I didn't care. I kept walking until I reached the curb and stopped, staring at the city lights reflecting in the puddles. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking, not from anger but from disbelief. I'd spent more than 2 decades building something I thought was mine, something I believed would always have a place for me. But in that moment it hit me. I was nothing more than a name on an old payroll sheet. I told myself right then, you will never give that man the satisfaction of seeing you break. So I stood tall, even as the rain poured harder, washing away whatever dignity I thought I'd lost. But deep down another voice whispered, one I hadn't heard before. He'll regret this, and for the first time in years I didn't just believe it, I knew it. After that morning, nothing at Cole & Partners felt the same. I'd always believed that work was supposed to be a place where effort meant something, where the hours you poured in, the dedication you showed, eventually came back to you as respect. But after Ethan's public mockery, all of that turned to dust. When I walked back into that office the next day, I could feel the difference immediately. The air itself seemed heavier. Conversations stopped when I passed. People who once shared inside jokes and coffee with me now avoided eye contact. It wasn't their fault entirely. Ethan had set the tone. If the boss treated me like a relic, everyone else would follow. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself I'd outlast his phase, that his ego trip would eventually burn out. But it didn't. In fact, it got worse. Ethan began to isolate me professionally. He'd forget to CC me on important emails or leave me out of strategy meetings I'd led for years. When I asked for updates, he'd say, "Oh, didn't I tell you? We've moved that project in a new direction," always with that smug little smirk. I could feel the invisible noose tightening every day. My new assignments were ridiculous. Last-minute data reports, redundant spreadsheets, impossible client follow-ups. I was no longer the senior consultant. I was the office errand boy with a fancier title. And when I tried to bring up the imbalance, he'd just tilt his head and say, "Robert, maybe it's time to let the new generation take over." That line hit harder than anything else. It wasn't advice. It was dismissal disguised as empathy. 3 months went by like that. A slow, humiliating erosion of dignity. My mornings became dreadful. I'd park my old sedan across the street and just sit there for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to gather the strength to walk in. Inside, I'd see the younger employees whispering near the coffee machine. Their laughter felt like echoes of that day in the conference room, a reminder that I was no longer part of the tribe I helped build. Still, I stayed, partly out of pride, partly out of fear. When you've spent half your life somewhere, walking away feels like tearing off your own skin. But the breaking point came one Friday afternoon. Ethan called me into his office. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "Robert," he said, "we've been reviewing team efficiency, and I think your skill set might be better suited elsewhere. Maybe advisory work or, I don't know, mentoring. This just isn't the right environment for you anymore." He wasn't firing me. He was pushing me to quit. And that hurt more. It meant I wasn't even worth the paperwork. I left that room with a lump in my throat, holding on to the last thread of my self-respect. The following Monday, I handed in my resignation. No speech, no drama. Just a short note and my old office key on his desk. He didn't even stand up to say goodbye. When the elevator doors closed behind me, I expected relief. Instead, I felt hollow. I'd built that company, mentored that man, poured my best years into his success, and then walked away like a ghost. The days after were the hardest. I'd wake up at 6:30 out of habit, get dressed, make coffee, and then realize there was nowhere to go. I'd sit on my porch with the same mug every morning, watching the neighborhood kids head to school, wondering what my life had amounted to. Job applications became my new full-time job. I must have sent out dozens, maybe hundreds. Every time, I'd get that same polite rejection email, filled with words that stung more than silence. "Overqualified. We've decided to move forward with younger candidates. Your experience is impressive, but we're looking for someone more dynamic." Dynamic. That was the new corporate word for "you're too old." I tried freelance consulting for a bit, but it wasn't the same. Clients wanted flashy PowerPoints and buzzwords. I came from a world where results mattered more than appearances, and apparently that made me obsolete. Then one afternoon, while wandering aimlessly through downtown with a paper cup of cold coffee, in my hand I saw it, a faded red for sale sign nailed to the side of a small abandoned office building. The place looked tired, forgotten, paint peeling, weeds sprouting through cracked concrete, windows smudged with years of dust. But for some reason I couldn't take my eyes off it. Something about that building felt familiar, like looking in a mirror. I walked closer, ran my hand along the wall, felt the rough texture under my fingers. The realtor inside was a young woman, probably half my age, scrolling through her phone. "Interested?" she asked, not expecting me to say yes. "Maybe," I replied. "What's the story?" Turned out the place used to belong to a small accounting firm that went under after the owner passed away. It had been empty for nearly 3 years. The bank just wanted to offload it. Most people would have seen a lost cause, but I saw potential. A blank canvas. A second chance. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that building. I imagined walking through those dusty halls, cleaning it up, painting the walls, bringing it back to life. Not as an employee this time, but as an owner. It sounded crazy. I didn't have the energy or the know-how to start a business at 56, but I did have something stronger. The fire Ethan had lit inside me the day he humiliated me. I wasn't done yet. And deep down, I whispered to myself, maybe this is where your real story begins. Buying that old building was the biggest risk I had ever taken in my life. I had no business background beyond consulting, no experience in real estate, and no partners to fall back on. Just a gut feeling and a stubborn refusal to fade quietly into irrelevance. When I told my family, they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. My sister, who'd always been the practical one, said, "Robert, you're 56, not 36. Why would you throw your savings into a crumbling piece of concrete? You should be thinking about relaxing, not rehabbing." But I wasn't looking for comfort. I didn't want to sit around waiting for life to end quietly. I wanted purpose, something to pour my anger into, something that made me feel alive again, and maybe, just maybe, a way to reclaim the dignity Ethan had stripped away. The day the sale went through, I stood outside the building in the cold morning air, holding the keys in my hand. They jingled faintly like a promise. The place looked terrible up close. Graffiti on the walls, busted windows, mold creeping along the corners, but to me it was beautiful. It wasn't failure. It was possibility. I started working on it right away. I didn't hire contractors at first. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I did most of the work myself. The first week, I ripped out old carpet that smelled like dust and regret. Then came the paint, layer after layer until the walls finally reflected light again. The floors took me weeks. I spent hours on my knees sanding, polishing, and installing new panels. It was exhausting, back-breaking work. My hands blistered, my back ached, and more than once I thought I might have bitten off more than I could chew. But every stroke of the brush, every repaired tile, every nail hammered into place felt like a piece of me coming back to life. Sometimes I'd take a step back and just stare at it, sweat dripping down my neck, and think, "You're building more than a building. Robert, you're rebuilding yourself." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. I lost track of time but not progress. Slowly, the place started to transform. The sunlight began to stream through clean windows again. The musty smell faded into something fresh, alive. And with each improvement, I began to feel the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as I was hauling old equipment to the dumpster, a young woman in a business suit stopped to talk. "Hey," she said, "is this place available for rent? My startup's looking for a small office, and everything else downtown is too expensive." Her question caught me off guard. I hadn't even considered renting it out. I was just fixing it for the sake of doing something with my life. But the idea clicked instantly. After she left, I sat down on the front steps, staring at the sign that still read "for sale," and that's when it hit me. I could turn this building into a small leasing business. Not only would it generate income, but it would also give me a way to create something lasting. I replaced the "for sale" sign with one that said, "office space available," just a cheap banner printed online. Within days, calls started coming in. Small law firms, freelance agencies, consultants, people who couldn't afford downtown rent but still wanted a decent place to work. One by one, I signed leases. I set fair prices, helped tenants with minor renovations, and even offered flexible payment plans. I wasn't trying to become rich, I just wanted to build something honest, something people could rely on. The first time a tenant handed me their rent check, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: self-worth. Not because of the money, but because I'd done it on my own. No corporate politics, no bosses, no humiliation. Just hard work and results. Within a year, the entire building was occupied. I hired a small property manager named Linda to help with the paperwork and maintenance requests. She was sharp, dependable, and didn't treat me like some old man chasing dreams. She respected what I'd built, and that mattered more than anything. The income started flowing steadily. I didn't live lavishly, but for the first time since leaving Cole & Partners, I felt at peace. I'd wake up early, walk through the hallways I'd restored, and feel a quiet sense of victory. Every door, every light fixture, every polished stair was proof that I could stand back up after being knocked down. And then, one ordinary morning, everything changed again. I was sipping coffee on my balcony when my phone rang. It was Linda. "Hey, Robert," she said, her voice casual. "We've got a new company interested in leasing the top floor. They're offering a really good rate, long-term too." "Sounds promising," I replied. "What company?" She hesitated for a moment. Cole & Partners Consulting." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. My grip on the mug tightened. "What did you say?" "Cole & Partners," she repeated. "The consulting firm. They're expanding downtown and want a new location. Do you want me to schedule a viewing?" I couldn't help but laugh softly, shaking my head in disbelief. Of all the companies in the city, of all the buildings they could have chosen, it had to be mine, Ethan Cole, my old boss. The man who humiliated me, mocked me, pushed me out like I was nothing. And now, without realizing it, he was about to walk straight into my building. I leaned back in my chair, letting that realization sink in. It wasn't anger I felt, not anymore. It was something colder, steadier, a calm awareness that the universe had just handed me an opportunity I never could have planned. Set up the meeting, I told Linda. Let's see what they're offering. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time staring out at the city skyline. The tables hadn't just turned. They'd flipped entirely. The man who once destroyed my career was about to sign a lease under my roof. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not the polite, tired kind of smile I used to give in meetings, but a real one. Slow, sincere, triumphant. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just business anymore. This was destiny coming full circle. They signed the lease within a week. Everything happened faster than I expected. Linda handled the paperwork, the background checks, the formalities, all of it under the name of my small holding company, Hayes Property Group. Ethan never saw my name. Not once. The lease agreement carried only the company signature, and that anonymity became my invisible armor. When she told me the deal had gone through, I just nodded and said, "Good work," but inside, my pulse was thundering like I'd just run a marathon. It wasn't anger, it was something more dangerous, more intoxicating. For years I'd felt powerless, stripped of pride and purpose, and now I held something Ethan didn't even know existed: control. The first time I saw him again, it was a strange, cinematic moment. He walked through the front doors of my building in his immaculate navy suit, hair slicked back, that same confident stride I remembered so well. I was standing near the lobby's reception counter, pretending to review maintenance reports. He didn't even glance my way. His assistant, a young woman who looked barely 25, handed me a folder with the new tenant's details, thinking I was just part of the building's operations team. "Could you make sure the Wi-Fi's active before tomorrow?" she asked politely. I smiled and said, "Of course." And just like that, Ethan Cole, the man who once made me feel like nothing, had walked right past me without realizing that the ground beneath his feet now belonged to me. The irony was delicious. For the next few months, I kept my distance, observing quietly from the shadows. Their renovation team transformed the top floor into a mirror of Ethan's personality. Cold, sleek, showy. Glass panels, chrome fixtures, and that oversized silver logo on the wall that screamed, "Cole & Partners Consulting." Every time I passed by, I'd feel a flicker of old memories. Meetings, laughter, camaraderie, all long gone, replaced by something sterile and shallow. But I didn't interfere. Not yet. I had no desire to gloat or expose myself too soon. Patience had become my new weapon. At first, it seemed like his company was thriving. Fancy cars parked outside, employees bustling in expensive suits, high-end catering deliveries during meetings. On the surface, it looked like success. But I'd worked long enough in business to recognize the cracks forming beneath. A glossy surface. Then the small red flags started to appear. The first missed rent. Payment came only 3 months after they moved in. Linda called to inform me. "It's probably a clerical issue," she said. "They promised to wire the funds by the end of the week." I didn't react. "Give them time," I said calmly, though my instincts whispered otherwise. The second missed payment arrived 2 months later, along with an email full of excuses, something about a client delay, a temporary liquidity issue. I'd heard those same lines before from desperate companies trying to hide their downfall. Then the whispers began. Tenants from other floors mentioned how often they saw new faces coming and going. Some of Ethan's old employees had started working elsewhere, leaving in waves. The receptionist gossiped about how his tone had changed. No longer the cocky young executive, but a man constantly on edge, snapping at his team, pacing the hallways with restless energy. One afternoon, as I was walking past their office on my routine inspection, I heard his voice echoing from the hallway. He was shouting at someone over the phone, furious, panicked, trying to maintain control. "Don't you dare pull that account, Martin. We've been partners for 10 years. I'll fix the numbers myself if I have to." The voice cracked midway. It wasn't arrogance anymore, it was desperation. I stopped just out of sight and listened. His tone wavered between pleading and anger, like a man trying to hold together something that was already collapsing. When the call ended, he slammed the phone onto the desk so hard it echoed through the corridor. That sound, it hit me like a memory. Years ago, I had watched that same man laugh at my expense in a crowded conference room, surrounded by people who joined his laughter like obedient echoes. And now here he was, alone, furious, drowning. But revenge isn't about rage. It's about timing. I went back to my office and started digging, nothing illegal, just research. Old contacts, business records, client filings. What I found confirmed my suspicions. Cole & Partners had lost 2 major clients over the last quarter, both to newer firms run by ex-employees. Their cash flow was bleeding. Their credit line had been stretched thin. Ethan had built his empire on image, not structure. It was a glass tower standing on quicksand. I didn't tell Linda what I'd discovered. I didn't tell anyone. I simply waited. Month after month, his payments became more erratic. Each delay came with new excuses. Our accounting team is transitioning. Funds are pending. It'll be settled soon. But the truth was clear. Ethan Cole was running out of money. And fast. I'd see him sometimes in the lobby, his tailored suits replaced by cheaper ones, his once polished demeanor cracked around the edges. The confidence that used to radiate from him had dimmed into something brittle. One evening, I stayed late to review maintenance requests. The building was quiet, most tenants gone for the day. As I passed the top floor, I saw Ethan alone through the glass walls of his office. The lights were still on, but the room was empty except for him sitting behind his desk with his head in his hands. Papers scattered around him. The mighty CEO of Cole & Partners looked small, like a man who had finally realized his own empire was crumbling. I stood there in silence, watching for a few moments before walking away. It wasn't joy I felt. Not satisfaction, not yet. Just a strange calm, as if the universe had started correcting an old imbalance. For years, he'd made me feel invisible. Now he was the one who couldn't see what was coming, and I didn't have to lift a finger. All I had to do was wait. 3 months after those first missed payments, the silence from Ethan's office became deafening. My property manager, Linda, had called and emailed repeatedly. No response. Even the reminders she posted to his tenant portal were left unread. I knew exactly what that meant. The walls were closing in on him. Still, I waited, patient as ever. I wasn't the same man he'd humiliated years ago in that conference room. Back then, I'd been desperate for respect, too afraid to push back. Now I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. When the 3rd month passed without a single dollar in rent, I decided it was time. Not out of anger, but out of principle. He needed to see who he had underestimated all those years ago. That Monday morning, I put on my best suit, a charcoal gray one I hadn't worn since my last year at Cole & Partners. I polished my shoes, straightened my tie, and for the first time in a long time, looked in the mirror and saw strength staring back. Then, I walked into my building with a calm authority that even I didn't recognize. The receptionist looked up as I entered and gave a polite nod. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." "Morning," I replied. "I'll be visiting the top floor today." I took the elevator up to Ethan's office. The ride felt like a slow ascent to justice. I could almost hear the ghosts of my past whispering in the hum of the elevator. Every word of ridicule, every fake smile, every bit of condescension. This was the moment life finally handed me the script I never got to write. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was different from before. Gone was the buzz of activity that used to fill the floor. Half the cubicles were empty, chairs pushed aside, computers unplugged. The few remaining employees looked exhausted, stressed, hollow-eyed, and jittery. I walked straight toward Ethan's glass-walled office. He was sitting behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, voice raised in frustration. "I told you, Peter, the payment's coming. Just give me until next week." When he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, his expression flickered between confusion and discomfort. He ended the call abruptly. "Robert," he said, his tone uncertain. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, the same calm, collected smile I'd practiced countless times in the mirror. "Just checking on my property." He frowned, blinking like he hadn't heard me right. "Your property?" Without a word, I took the folder from under my arm and placed it on his desk. The lease agreement, the one with my name printed boldly across the top. Robert Hayes, owner, Hayes Property Group. I watched the color drain from his face as he read it. His jaw tightened, his hands trembled ever so slightly. "You're the owner?" he whispered. "That's right," I said, leaning back slightly, savoring every word. "And as the owner, I thought it was about time we had a little chat. You're 3 months behind on rent." For a moment, the silence between us felt electric. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was replaying every interaction, every cruel remark, every smirk from the old days. It was all coming back to him, and now he realized who was in control. "Robert," he started, his voice faltering. "I didn't know. Look, we've had a rough quarter. 2 of our clients went under, and I held up a hand. You don't owe me an explanation, Ethan. I'm not here to make your life difficult. I just came to remind you that business is business." He looked at me, eyes pleading. "Just give me some time, okay? Things will turn around soon. You know how the market is." I nodded slowly. "Oh, I know. Better than anyone. You see, I've lived through ups and downs in business, but the difference is I never let arrogance blind me." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "This isn't about arrogance, Robert. It's just bad timing." "Maybe," I said softly. "But timing's a funny thing, isn't it? One day you're on top, laughing in front of a crowd, and the next—" I glanced around the half-empty office. "Well, things change." His face went still, and for a brief second I saw the flicker of recognition. The memory of that day he'd humiliated me in front of everyone. I didn't press further. I didn't need to. The weight of his own past was enough. I picked up the lease folder and said calmly, "Don't worry, Ethan, I'll give you time. But remember, time, like rent, eventually runs out." And with that, I turned and walked out. The hallway outside his office felt brighter, lighter, as if the very air had shifted. Each step echoed like a quiet victory. Employees glanced at me curiously, perhaps sensing something had changed in the balance of power, though they couldn't quite name it. When I reached the elevator, I allowed myself a small smile. Not one of cruelty or vengeance, but of peace. For years, I'd been the man who had no voice, the man who walked away in silence while others laughed behind his back. Now the roles were reversed. I didn't need to yell or threaten. I didn't need to humiliate him the way he did me. Because true revenge isn't about destruction. It's about letting the truth do the work. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Ethan through the glass, a man sitting alone behind his desk, his confidence stripped away, staring blankly at the contract that bore my name. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I hadn't just taken back my dignity. I'd taken back my power. The man who once made me feel small now sat inside my building, paying rent he couldn't afford, trapped by the very arrogance that once made him untouchable. I didn't have to ruin him. All I had to do was let reality finish the job. The weeks that followed my visit were like watching a slow-motion unraveling of everything Ethan had built. Or rather, everything he had pretended to build. At first it was subtle. The receptionist, who used to greet every visitor with a bright smile, stopped showing up. A few desks sat empty for days. The coffee machine in the break room stayed untouched, and the hum of daily office chatter faded into an eerie stillness. Then the whispers began. Rumors about missed paychecks, about clients demanding refunds, about investors getting cold feet. I didn't have to pry. Word travels fast in small business circles. People who once name-dropped Ethan's company like it was a badge of honor now avoided any association. The same people who used to flatter him at networking events suddenly had other commitments. Ethan's company had always been built more on image than substance, a gleaming facade of luxury branding, expensive suits, and stage success. Behind the polished glass walls and mahogany desks, though, it was hollow. No solid foundation, no loyalty, no respect. And like all hollow empires, it was destined to collapse under the weight of its own pride. Each week I'd receive updates from my property manager. One more employee resigned. The second floor is empty now. They're behind another week on rent. She'd speak cautiously, unsure if she should be pleased or concerned. But I always answered the same way, calmly and without gloating. Let things take their course. I didn't need to interfere. The universe was doing a far better job at balancing the scales than I ever could. By the 4th week, his office resembled a ghost town. The sound of clicking keyboards had vanished, replaced by the dull echo of footsteps and the occasional slam of a file cabinet being emptied. Where once there had been ambition and noise, there was now only exhaustion and regret. Ethan, the man who once strutted through the corridors with an air of invincibility, had become a shadow of himself. His crisp suits were replaced with wrinkled shirts. The sparkle of arrogance in his eyes had dimmed into quiet panic. I knew that look. I had worn it once, back when I walked out of his office years ago, humiliated and broken. But now the roles had reversed. His downfall wasn't theatrical. It wasn't a loud crash. It was quiet, painful, and beautifully inevitable. It was like watching a grand building slowly sink into the ground, brick by brick, until only dust remained. Soon, clients began pulling their contracts. First one, then another, then a domino effect. They cited delayed deliverables, unanswered calls, broken commitments. But the real reason was simpler. They'd lost faith. Investors followed next, retreating like soldiers abandoning a lost cause. Without their money, Ethan couldn't keep the lights on. The once bustling firm that had prided itself on confidence and power now stood on life support. And then came the final notice, an official termination of lease from my property management team. 3 months overdue, no payments made, no sign of recovery. The inevitable had arrived. The day they moved out, the morning air was strangely calm. The sky was overcast and a faint drizzle misted the city streets. I arrived at the building early, standing in the lobby as movers came and went, carrying cardboard boxes, disassembled desks, and chairs that once held his empire together. I didn't say a word. I simply watched. Every box that passed felt symbolic. Another piece of arrogance packed away, another chapter of deception sealed shut. Some of the younger employees looked ashamed, avoiding my eyes as they walked out, while others looked relieved, as if they were finally free from the pressure of keeping up appearances. Then, through the glass doors, Ethan appeared. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit or that smug grin that used to follow him like a shadow. His tie was gone, his shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes were hollow from sleepless nights. He walked slowly, his head bowed, his once commanding posture bent beneath invisible weight. As he passed me, he paused for a moment. For the first time in years, he really looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me. There was no bitterness in his gaze, no anger, no defense, just a quiet acknowledgement of truth. "You really got me, didn't you?" he said softly. His voice wasn't filled with resentment. It carried something heavier, acceptance. I met his eyes, calm and composed. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because the truth was I hadn't gotten him at all. I hadn't schemed or plotted or pulled any strings behind the scenes. Life had simply brought him face to face with his own reflection. His downfall was never my doing, it was his. The lies, the arrogance, the exploitation, the ego, they had all been bricks in the wall that eventually caved in on him. So I stood there in silence, letting him walk past me and out the door. His footsteps echoed across the marble lobby, each one fainter than the last until the automatic doors closed behind him. Outside, the drizzle had turned into rain. I watched through the glass as Ethan stepped out into it without an umbrella, the water soaking through his clothes. For a brief moment, I almost felt a pang of pity. But it wasn't cruelty that held me still. It was understanding. We both knew what it was like to lose everything. The difference was I'd learned from my fall. He hadn't. As the last moving truck pulled away and the lobby grew still again, I took one final look around. The office that once symbolized power and pride now stood empty, echoing with the ghosts of ambition gone wrong. I exhaled slowly, not in triumph, but in closure. Because revenge wasn't about watching someone crumble, it was about watching justice unfold naturally. And as I turned and walked out into the rain, one truth followed me like a whisper in the wind. Empires built on ego don't need enemies to destroy them. They destroy themselves. Months passed after Ethan's company packed up and left the building, leaving behind empty rooms and echoes of what once was an empire of ego. For a while, that top floor remained vacant, a silent monument to everything I had endured and everything I had overcome. Every time I passed it, I felt a strange mix of emotions: satisfaction, melancholy, and a quiet kind of peace. The ghosts of humiliation still lingered there, but they no longer haunted me. They reminded me, instead of how far I had come, how much I had reclaimed, not from Ethan, but from myself. Eventually, a new tenant came along, a small tech startup, full of energy and purpose. They were the kind of people who reminded me of what we all used to be at Cole and Partners in the early days, young, hopeful, and hungry to build something that mattered. When I first met them, their enthusiasm filled the air, brightening the dull corridors that had been heavy with bitterness for so long. They had ideas scribbled on napkins, laptops covered in stickers, and a belief that hard work could change the world. I watched them move in with excitement that was almost infectious. They painted the walls themselves, brought in mismatched furniture, and worked late into the night with pizza boxes piled on desks. There was laughter again in that building, real laughter, not the forced kind that used to echo from Ethan's meetings. I found myself walking by more often, offering advice when they asked, helping them fix a leaky faucet or figure out how to negotiate their contracts. One morning, one of their team members, a young man named Alex, stopped me in the lobby. He was polite, curious the way people often are when they sense there's more to your story than you let on. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "you've been so helpful. Hope you don't mind me asking, but do you ever miss your old job?" For a moment, I thought about it. I thought about the years I'd spent at Cole and Partners, the friendships, the late nights, the ambition. I thought about the laughter in the break room before it turned into mockery. I thought about the pride I once felt walking into that office every morning. And then I thought about the day Ethan humiliated me, the day I walked away with nothing but my pride barely intact. I thought about the months that followed, the anger, the loneliness, the slow rebuilding of everything I'd lost. I looked at Alex and smiled. "Not really," I said quietly. "Some things you have to lose to find yourself again." He nodded, though I could tell he didn't fully understand yet. Maybe one day he would. As I watched their team grow and succeed, I realized something profound. My revenge had never truly been about Ethan. It wasn't about seeing him fall or watching his company crumble. It wasn't about the humiliation or the anger I'd carried for so long. It was about taking back what I had allowed someone else to take from me, my dignity, my purpose, my sense of worth. Ethan's downfall had been poetic, yes, but it wasn't my masterpiece. It was simply life doing what it does best, balancing the scales in its own quiet, deliberate way. The arrogance that had once lifted him eventually became the weight that dragged him down. I didn't need to push him. He was already walking toward the edge. My victory wasn't loud. It didn't come with applause or headlines. It came in the stillness of early mornings when I unlocked the doors of my building and smelled fresh coffee brewing from the startup upstairs. It came in the laughter that drifted down the hall, in the sound of progress being made without cruelty, without arrogance. It came in knowing that I had rebuilt not just a business, but a life. There was peace in that, a kind of peace I'd never known before. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the lobby window as I locked up for the night, and I barely recognized the man staring back. He looked older, yes, but lighter somehow. The lines on his face weren't just from age. They were from survival, from learning when to let go and when to rebuild. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Ethan, not to the world, and not even to myself. Because I finally understood that dignity doesn't come from power or position. It comes from how you carry yourself when everything else falls apart. Ethan had once taught me the sharpest lessons of betrayal and pride. But life had taught me something far greater, that real victory doesn't need to be shouted. It can whisper quietly and still be heard in the heart. And as the years rolled on, I found myself genuinely grateful for everything that had happened. The pain, the humiliation, the rebuilding, the renewal. Without all of it, I never would have discovered who I really was beyond the titles. Beyond the corporate walls, beyond the validation of others. I had lost everything that once defined me. And in doing so, I had found the one thing that mattered most: peace. The building that had once been my prison had become my sanctuary, and in its walls filled now with the hopeful laughter of others chasing dreams of their own, I finally felt free. When I look back now at all those years, all the humiliation, all the silent battles I fought, I don't feel the same anger that once burned inside me. It's strange how time changes the way pain feels. What once felt like a wound now feels like a lesson carved deep into my soul. And that lesson is simple. Arrogance always comes with a price. For a long time, I believed Ethan was my enemy, the man who took everything from me, the one who laughed as he stripped away my dignity in front of the people I once called colleagues. But as the years passed, I realized something much deeper. Ethan wasn't my enemy. He was my teacher. He taught me, through his cruelty, what pride unchecked can do to a man. He showed me the cost of forgetting where you came from, of losing sight of the people who helped you climb. See, arrogance blinds you. It makes you believe you're untouchable, that you're smarter, better, more deserving than everyone else. But life has a way of humbling the proud. It waits patiently, letting arrogance build its own trap, until one day, everything collapses under its own weight. And when that happens, it doesn't just take your job or your money. It takes your peace, your respect, and your reflection in the mirror. When Ethan lost everything, I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to remind him of what he did. Because I knew the silence of his downfall said more than any words I could ever speak. Watching him walk out of my building, his head bowed, was not a moment of celebration. It was a moment of realization. Revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about rebuilding yourself so completely that you no longer care if they notice. That's the real victory, the quiet kind. The one that comes not from shouting but from knowing that you've risen above. So when people treat you badly, when they mock your age, your hard work, or your kindness, don't waste your time plotting their downfall. Don't let bitterness take root in your heart. Instead, pour that energy into yourself. Build something they can never take away from you, your integrity, your purpose, your self-respect. Because one day, life will bring you a moment where your success will speak louder than your pain ever could. I lived long enough to see that moment. Ethan once stood above me, confident that he'd won. He thought I was finished, irrelevant, obsolete. But fate, oh, it has a sense of humor. Because years later, he ended up working under my roof, paying rent to the same man he once humiliated. And the best part? I didn't even have to lift a finger. I didn't destroy him. His own arrogance did. That's what people never understand. When you let ego drive your choices, you might get ahead for a while, but eventually, you run out of road. And when that happens, you'll wish you'd treated people differently. You'll wish you'd valued kindness over pride. So if you're watching this, and someone is trying to break your spirit, someone who mocks you, underestimates you, or makes you feel small, remember my story. Don't let them decide who you become. Let their arrogance be your motivation, not your destruction. Stay calm. Stay patient. Work quietly. Keep building even when no one's watching. Because one day, the world will turn. And when it does, you won't need revenge. Your success, your peace, your dignity, they'll speak for you louder than any anger ever could. That's the beauty of life. It has a way of handing you the stage exactly when your enemies think the curtain's closed. And when that moment comes, when the people who doubted you finally have to look up and see what you've become, don't laugh at them. Don't mock them the way they mocked you. Just smile, nod, and move on. Because by then you'll have outgrown the very stage they tried to keep you off of. The price of arrogance is always the same. It costs you the respect of others, and eventually, your own. But the reward of humility, patience, and perseverance, that's something no one can take away. So remember this, when they try to break you, let them. Because every crack they make only gives you space to rebuild stronger. And maybe, just maybe, one day, you'll be standing exactly where I stood, owning the place where they once tried to break you.